Hello everyone! This is the last part of my series on editing the photos I took during my ski trip in Chamonix, France. And in this one, we're going to be talking about demystifying the masking tools. And this is very important if you want to bring your pictures to the next level. Let's get started by rolling the intro. For those of you who are new to this channel, I'm Bellemare-Alford, a young photographer and filmmaker on the journey to become better at this art. Just before we start, I want to remind you that I'm going to be using my MacBook Pro and also Lightroom to edit these photos, but it really doesn't matter what you're using, whether it's your phone, a tablet, or a completely different device, or a totally different software like Polar Photo Editor, my favorite free photo editing app. Also, don't forget to stick till the end if you want to learn how to get my free presets that I use on all of the photos for this trip. Okay, so up to now inside of our edits, we applied the presets to get a base edit. We tweaked them a little bit to get better settings. Then in the second video, we talked about how you can use a clone stamp tool to remove distractions and make the whole shot just look better in general. And this is the third and last step that I apply, and it's adding masks to really make the pictures look better in the end and really help the viewer to look at the proper parts of the image. So instead of here, we're going to open the first image here and talk about what are masks in the first place. If we come inside of the app and we go on the side right here, we're going to be able to have their different masks appear here. Instead of Lightroom Mobile, they're at the bottom of the app, or if you're using Polar Photo Editor, I think they're completely on the different tab, but all of the apps have very similar features in the end for masking. So first of all, here we have some very basic masks. For example, linear gradient right here. So this allows us to apply linear gradient, or we could apply a radial gradient. So these are the most basic types of masks that are out there. And these are very important because they define the parts here that are in red. They're going to be able to define different types of settings than the rest of the image. You might have heard about local editing on your images, and this is really important if you want to be able to tweak some parts of the images, but not all of the other ones at the same time. Because a lot of the times when you're applying an edit to the whole image, it makes some parts of the image look worse and some parts of them look even better. After the basic types of that we have here, linear gradient and also mask, there's a bunch of different ones, and this is going to vary depending on the software you're using. But here we have an object one. Here you can simply come here, draw on your image what you want, and the AI is going to detect whatever you're trying to draw. It wasn't perfect in this case, but you get the point. Then there's a brush. Most tools have a brush. That's a really simple one. You can just like brush whatever the part you want to be editing. Finally, here we also have people. So if there was somebody in my shot, I could use that. There's a sky option. This one is really cool. I use it all the time inside of my shots these days. Then there's color range, so I could select a color here and say I want to select everything with a similar color inside of this shot. And finally, we have a luminance range, so this could say I want to have everything that's very dark in the image, or I want to have everything that is very bright. So you can tweak your different settings here. So on this shot, I'm going to start here and delete all of the different masks and do what I do for most shots, which are very basic edits here. So first of all, when you have a blue sky like here, I usually don't like keeping a blue sky like this just because it's very boring and it's kind of distracting, because here you have your centerpiece of the image that you want to be showing, but then at the top here, there's not much interest inside of it. So just to add a little bit more interest and bring your eye towards the subject, so this is a concept that is very important. You want to use masks to mask out the parts that you don't want people to see as much. So usually make them darker, make them softer, something like that, and bring the eye towards the main subject of the image. So in here, we're going to add a mask from the top to the bottom here. Something very simple. We're going to bring down the exposure. You don't want to go too much, because like looking like this looks awful. So you want to be very careful of just adding something that's very subtle that most people won't see. I might add a little bit more feather here. And like this look just looks natural. If we exit right here, we're going to see, you don't really see it, but subtly with your eye, when you look at this image, now you're looking more at the mountain and the colorful colors. The second way I use this a lot is to create some vignettes. You have to be careful with vignettes. You don't want to be adding vignettes to every single photos, but in this case, where most of the things around the main subjects are pretty boring, it's the same pattern and everything, this can be a really good place where you could add a vignette. And for this, we're going to use a radial gradient right here. We're going to come here, make it nice and big so we have a really nice feather right here. I'm actually going to increase the feather even more by using the on-screen tools. And then we're going to come here and invert, because we want to select the parts that are around here and we're gonna make those parts darker. So now we're gonna just bring it down a little bit here. And this is really gonna help bring the attention to your subject. And by using a radial grid in here, instead of using the vignette tools inside of Lightroom, you're able to really target the different parts of the image where you want to bring the attention. So instead of bringing it in the middle of the shot, you're bringing it exactly on the subject you want to have, depending on the size, where it's located, and things like that. So just from here, so if we're going to look at before and after, you're going to see it's subtle, but it does really help bringing your eye towards that subject. Now what we're going to do, I think is pretty helpful, is go through a bunch of examples to show you how I applied mask to the different shots, so you can really get a good idea of what I'm doing, what type of mask I'm using, and what you can do with them to make them look better. So if we start with the first shot right here, my goal right here, if we remove the mask right here, was actually just to make sure that the sides here were a little bit less visible, so you can really see the background, because you want to have the eye go to the background right here. So first of all, we have a mask at the bottom right here. This is simply making the exposure down a little bit on the pavement here. Then I think I painted with some brushes right here, both sides of the place, but I actually used here what we call an intersect mask. So if I want to recreate this one, I'm just going to quickly show you how to do this, because this is something pretty cool you can do inside of Lightroom. Is let's say I only want to select this part, I can do a first radial grid in here to select all of this side. But now if I apply the mask here, I'm also going to be including the bottom part here, and we don't want that. So here we can do the subtract option here, use another linear gradient, do a little bigger feather here, and now I've selected only that part of the side here. I actually could have tried using also the AI option here, so the object here, and try and paint this there. There's always a bunch of different ways of doing this, so you could use different ways. Actually works pretty well here using this. But the idea here was simply bringing down the luminosity here on the side right here. Actually just brought down the highlights here. Same thing on the right side, did something very similar here, where I just removed some of the highlights on both sides to bring the attention in the end here. If we look at the second shot right here, it's actually very simple. On most of these shots, I simply applied a mask to the sky. So here I used the sky option and brought back down the exposure a little bit and brought the contrast, because if you look at before, the skies are usually overblown in these shots, and I want to make them look like if there's more dynamic range than there was actually when I was looking at the scene. The next one here is one case where I have a little bit more of an extreme vignette. So here we have the vignette. If we look at it without here, we're going to see it's kind of a boring shot, but here we have some very strong leading lines going all around here towards the subject here of the bridge. So here we can use a stronger vignette, because it's really going to bring your eye towards what you want inside of this shot. If we look at here, I also have a mask on the sky. Again, just bringing down some of the highlights, bring some of the contrast, just because they had nice clouds that were very moody. So I wanted to bring this out. When you have a sunset, using mask can be a must right here, because they allow really to get some of the details back from the sky. So if we look at the sky mask without here, we're going to see we don't really get the sunset here. So bringing this back really helps. What you have to be careful is that if you're editing a sky right here, and let's say you decide you want to bring this up, make it super bright or something like that, I don't know, go crazy with it. Now, because the rest of the shot is not that bright and your sky is too bright compared to the rest, it doesn't really look natural. So you have to be careful. Same thing here, if you go super dark, bring back all this detail, it doesn't really look natural, because the rest of the scene doesn't match. So you want to go somewhere where here the colors are clipping a little bit, but not too much, and overall look good. Another little trick here is I added a linear gradient at the bottom here, remove the exposure a little bit. This just makes it a little bit darker here without really changing much, but it just helps bringing your eye again towards the houses and the sunset. I also applied here an AI mask right here to allow to just add a little bit of exposure here inside of the house, and also add a little bit of texture just to make them a little bit sharper in the end. Very similar idea in the next shot right here. So we have here a radial gradient that goes on the mountain here. I actually think this one is pretty important, just to really darken a little bit the corners and bring your attention here. Then I have here an object mask, AI mask here, that adds some texture inside of the mountain and the haze here. You're gonna see if we remove it, it's really subtle here, but again, it just makes the mountains pop a little bit more. And finally, a mask on the sky. I pretty much apply mask on the sky in almost every single shot. This next one is a photo that I edited a lot more. You can see there's a lot more masks right here. So if we go through different ones, first of all, there's a radial gradient right here to add some detail for the mountain in the background. So here it's just making everything else darker, because that's our main subject. On this side here, there's another one here where I bring down the exposure a little bit, nothing too special. This one, the background is actually interesting. I selected all of the background using the AI object and then brought the contrast up just to make it look a little bit punchier and had a little bit more contrast inside of it. Finally, at the bottom here, I'm adding a foreground mask right here. One thing I'm doing here is simply reducing a little bit the highlights just to make it a little bit darker, and again, bring your attention to the back of the image. If you look at the sky mask right here, I went a little bit crazy and really made the clouds a lot darker. This is important because in this image, it just makes it moodier and really shows how it was when I was there that day. Final mask here, again, remove a little bit more some of the highlights here. Play with the contrast a little bit more. So these are all the things I applied on this image to make it look better. This next one is actually interesting here because there's a very subtle little one. So as usual, there's one on the sky mask, but again, nothing very special here. But if you look at this one right here, it's just painted over here, nothing very special with this one. But what is pretty special right here is actually I use the highlights to bring them a little bit less inside of the view. But the big thing that I actually do here is just in the bottom here, I bring the clarity down completely. So if we toggle it on and off, you're gonna see that it just makes the foreground here softer to the eye. So you don't look at them as much. You go to the part at the back here where there's more contrast, there's more things to look at because that's just not interesting. So it's just a quick way of making this part less attractive to people and bring the subject out of the picture. But the next one here, definitely one of my favorite pictures of the trip. And I was really happy to recover it using mask because you're really gonna see the power on this one. So if we look at the picture here before the masks, first of all, we have a few problems here. So on the sides here, the sides are way too bright. So this building here looks too bright. The clouds, the trees here on the side also with the white are too bright, and we don't really see the stars in the sky. So I applied here a mask, automatic mask for the sky right here. And this allowed me to bring the stars out using the clarity tool. I have other videos that talk about how to edit the skies inside of your videos, astrophotography shots. So definitely go check those astrophotography videos if you want to learn more about that. But what really helped here is the mask that I have at the front here. So here what I did was applying the invert of a sky mask. So this is going to select everything that's in the foreground right here. And then I applied the radial gradient that I removed. So I removed the center part here. So this in the end just applies a mask on the sides right here and allows me to bring down the exposure here and make these parts less of a distraction inside of the shot. Again, I think you understood the theme up to now. A lot of what you're doing in photo editing is just removing distractions and making your subject pop inside of the shot. So this is a really good way here where it allowed me to get the shot. Again, let's look at the before and after. I think here the masks are very important to make this shot look better. Same thing here, another reason why using masks can be very useful is for when you have very high dynamic range and really tough shots to take, you can use masks to just make everything come out and look better. So here, if I don't apply a mask, I cannot recover the parts of the background here because I already have the highlights completely down. So in this case, I can add a bunch of masks here and select different parts, and through each of them, go through and remove some of the highlights, remove some of the exposure, just to make sure that the background and the foreground work perfectly well together and look as if they were one. If you look at the next shot right here, this is actually one of my favorite shots of my trip. Very simple, but if we look without the mask here, so there's simply one on the sky. Without it, I think the sky looks too distracting, but by removing this, you really bring the attention on these clouds all over the mountain, and this just makes it look a lot better. This is one example here using the person object AI detection. So this allows me to control the background here where I can bring down the exposure of the background a little bit and make the background look better. And then I can apply some edits to the person in the shot. And this is very important because if you look at the shot without the mask, if you look at the original one here, there's not as much detail in my face. And if I try correcting for me, it's really hard then to correct for the background. So having the two masks working together just allows to get a better result. One important thing, if you're applying a vignette like right here, and let's say you apply it too much and you apply it like this, you might not realize, especially if you're editing on your phone right away, that it's looking pretty bad. So one trick right here is simply go in and zoom out of your image completely, and now look at your shot here. If it looks weird because there's some parts that are very dark and the other parts are not as dark, that's because you went too far with your radial gradient here. So you want to come back here and adjust it and make it look more natural. So this is a good way of editing your photos and making sure that they're looking natural. So if when they're small, they're looking good. If they're looking good when they're also big, that means that you nailed your Radial Grid. Again, you want to make sure that these masking techniques don't make the picture look worse. You want to keep them natural and not go crazy with them and make something that looks completely unnatural. This is honestly one of my favorite shots of the whole trip. I think it's a really nice one. And again, here some masking was required. But it's very simple actually. I'm just applying some mask in the background here on this object. So I used the object to find the tool, and I'm basically removing some of the highlights. So if we remove this mask, we're gonna see that just helps bring out the mountain in the background a little bit. I also bring the texture up a lot. By accident, I missed my focus a little bit, so it's not as sharp as I want it to be. So this just helps bring out the mountain a little bit. Then I also apply a mask on the whole background here on the sky. Again, Lightroom does a really good job of picking out the background and the foreground here. And I'm just adding some contrast, removing some highlights. And this just allows to add more detail inside of the clouds here, because I think without the clouds, it's a little bit of a boring shot, and adding more detail inside of the clouds just makes the whole thing a lot nicer. So here, the two masks are not as much to bring the tension on the subject and just making the whole image better looking and more interesting in the end. Here again, it's another case where I used the people tool here. Here I just tweaked it a little bit to make the highlights a little bit higher. If we remove this one, it's just I'm a little bit darker. It's very subtle different here, but it just allows me to be pop out a little bit more inside the picture. This has been a little bit longer than I expected, but I hope that these examples helped you understand when I decide to apply a mask or not. In general, the question I ask myself, because I don't apply mask to all the photos, even though I did part for 3/4 of the photos of this trip, is I'm asking myself, can I make the subject come out by making some of the parts of the image brighter, darker, add more contrast, reduce the contrast, or things like that? And if the answer is yes, that I could apply a mask somewhere to be able to get some better results, I do it. But this is really something you have to test out and try and play and see if what works or not, because the more you're gonna do this, the more you're gonna know in the future when looking at a shot very quickly which type of mask you should apply, how you can apply it, and how you can improve your shot by using them. So this is definitely going to take some practice to know when some masks are required or not inside of your images. But I really do hope it did convince you that masks are super useful inside of your images. Just like I did for the other videos inside of this series, there's going to be the link down in the description with the photos at different stages. So there's going to be the original photo, then the photo with the presets, the photo with the clone stamp applied, and finally the final shot edited using the mask and all of the other editing techniques I talked about inside of those videos. If you're interested in getting the free presets, definitely go check out the link down in the description. It's gonna ask you to subscribe to my newsletter. You can unsubscribe anytime if you don't really want to get them, but I think they're gonna be pretty useful for you because I'm gonna be sharing some of the tips I have on my website every month, but also the photos I publish on my website, some photos I shared on Instagram, also some photos and videos I'm sharing on YouTube. So I think it's just a good way of keeping up to date what I'm doing, and in exchange you get some free presets. So I think it's a win-win for both of us. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by hitting the like button below, and definitely subscribe to my channel for more content on photography and filmmaking. See you in the next one.